Let there be no doubt, the right to repair the product that you have purchased is a fundamental principle that individuals and businesses should not, under any circumstances, have any doubt as to where the bright lines are in their rights. From smartphones to home appliances to the firmware on cars, there is today doubt. The doubt is state by state, product by product. Well, I am proud to sponsor the SMART Act, a bill that will expand consumer choice for automobile collision repair parts, decrease costs for both drivers and insurers, and enhance competition in the automotive repair parts market.
But as we consider these complex questions, we should remember that most consumers just want somebody to fix their cars when they break. For years, for generations, Americans have taken their cars to a local garage when something goes wrong, a right that was reaffirmed by a 2014 Memorandum of Understanding between the repair shops and the OEMs. It is highly concerning to me that in spite of the 2014 MOU, rather than seeking a fix to the safety and cyber concerns inherent in technological innovation, OEMs have sought to steer customers back toward dealerships and away from the car mechanic that they trust. Mr. Benavides, I was deeply concerned to see the original equipment manufacturers react to the Massachusetts right to repair ballot measure by suspending access to telematic accessories for vehicles sold in the state. How will the recent agreement between repair shops and OEMs affect consumer choice going forward?
Thank you, Congressman.
And are you concerned that we'll end up with a patchwork of state laws governing right to repair?
This agreement with the OEMs is great for us because we finally get to put to rest the fact that we don't have information, right? That we weren't able to get information. So this is an agreement that we've worked on for a while to make sure that we have access to all information, including telematics and anything coming forward.
How will the recent agreement between repair shops and OEMs affect consumer choice going forward? And are you concerned that we'll end up with a patchwork of state laws governing the right to repair?
Well, first of all, the agreement, as was mentioned, does not represent the vast majority of aftermarket service providers, and therefore, you know, I think mostly performs a sort of, you know, public relations role rather than a functional role in terms of how the aftermarket will work. You know, is there concern about a patchwork of laws? Well, I think for consumers who are, you know, bending and breaking under the cost of high vehicle repairs and struggling to maintain their vehicles, they would rather have a state law than no law at all. So I think, yes, of course, from everybody's perspective, it would be better to have one federal law that applies across the country.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for hosting this important hearing today and for your leadership on this issue. I am proud to join with you in this subject. And I'd like to begin with returning to you, Professor Perzanowski, on this question. Obviously, one of our concerns is the rising cost of repairs when coupled with the rising cost of vehicles, how this affects consumers. And I'd like for you to talk with us about the effect that you anticipate passage of the SMART Act might have on insurance rates for consumers, and whether it is something we should anticipate a decrease in rates, lower costs as parts and repairs become more accessible for consumers.
Thank you so much for the question. So I think if we see passage of the SMART Act, we can anticipate significant reductions in the expenses associated with auto collision repairs. Estimates are that design patents on collision parts are responsible for about $1.5 billion in additional expenditures. We see price premiums on OEM parts over third-party parts often reaching into like the 40% range, right? So these are pretty significant cost savings associated with that. Part of this problem, I think, does relate back to the kind of unique structure of this market, Most consumers are not paying out of pocket for collision repairs. Those costs are being covered by their auto insurance provider, and so the consumer doesn't see that I'm pulling this from memory, so don't hold me to this figure, but the side view mirror of a Ford Fiesta costing $1,500. That's not something that the consumer is confronted with, right? So this goes back to the question of notice. Do consumers know when they buy that vehicle that the repairs are going to be that expensive? I think in most cases they don't. And so I think the SMART Act is a very targeted solution to this problem. I do think it's important to note that the design patent issue for replacement parts is not limited to the automotive industry. I think it's the most, I think that's the area where the problem is most pressing, but home appliances, consumer electronics, we see companies getting design patents on replacement water filters for refrigerators so that they can charge 3 times as much when the little light comes on your fridge to tell you that your water might not be as clean as you want it to be. So I think we have to think about that problem across a range of industries, but the automotive industry, I think, is absolutely the right place to start.
All right. And staying with the automotive industry and the concept of the SMART Act, would passage of the SMART Act, in your view, promote entry into the repair market of more mom and pop or independent shops? And if so, how would that advantage the end consumer?
So I think in an environment where consumers are facing lower costs for repairs, and fewer vehicles are being totaled, right? One of the byproducts here of the high prices of these replacement parts is more and more vehicles are being totaled. So we would see more opportunity for competition in those marketplaces. And generally, right, we rely on this principle that the more competition we see, the lower prices are going to be and the higher quality is going to be. And so I think that's beneficial.
And Mr. Roberts, you look like you had something to add there.
No, not really. I mean, I think that what Aaron said is correct, which is, one of the key goals of right to repair legislation is to promote a vibrant ecosystem of service and repair. I mean, one point I would just make is that with the Internet of Things, right, we are facing a crisis in the very near future as manufacturers of everything from home appliances to personal electronics to equipment, as those products age and those manufacturers walk away from their responsibility to maintain them. So we're no longer supporting the software, we're no longer issuing security updates. Who will step in to maintain those devices, keep them secure, keep them operating, right? The manufacturers walked away. Do we just get rid of them? No, because the equipment still works perfectly. We're going to need a market-based response to that. We're going to need small businesses to step up and say, hey, I'll keep that Samsung dishwasher working for another 20 years. That's a huge economic opportunity for this country, but we cannot do it in the existing system because of the types of restrictions that we're talking about. And so this is really about enabling a secure future in which when you buy a dishwasher with a 20-year lifespan or 25-year lifespan, it's going to last that 25 years, not the 5 to 6 years that the manufacturer has decided, that's how long we want to support the software for. And there are cybersecurity implications for that as well, obviously.
Thank you.
The 2014 Memorandum of Understanding between the original equipment manufacturers and the repair associations guaranteed that the OEMs would provide the same service information and tools to independent repair shops as they do their franchise dealers. How has this agreement worked in practice, and do you believe we need federal legislation on the right to repair?
We urgently need a federal version of the Massachusetts law, the Repair Act. A couple of reasons why. First of all, Mr. Benavides is right. Right now, this is not an urgent issue because most of the cars out there are older vehicles. As we move forward, as telematics systems evolve as automakers continue their trend of moving more and more information to telematics systems, this is going to become a bigger problem. I'll point out another problem, which is the Massachusetts law is contingent on data transfers of diagnostic and repair information via the OBD or onboard diagnostic 2 port under the dashboard. That's only there because of federal clean air law. Electronic vehicles don't have that port because they don't have emissions. And so in the very near future, as we shift to electronic vehicles, that data access port will no longer be there. It will all be telematics data. And so the utility of the Massachusetts law is going to decline over time going forward. And again, when you start talking about right to repair, you become like this crazy person who talks about right to repair every time it comes up. But one thing I try and stress to people when I talk to them about auto repair is if you live in Michigan or California and you have taken your vehicle to the local independent repair shop, you have only done that because the voters in Massachusetts passed a ballot measure over a decade ago and then updated it in November 2020. That is the very thin thread that our right to use independent auto repair hangs by in this country. That's not the way it's supposed to be. This is something that affects vehicle owners, hundreds of millions of them in all 50 states, and it's a type of thing that the federal government needs to address with federal legislation. It should not hang by this very thin thread.